Welcome to the Tristan Law Show. If it's your first time here, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. I am Tristan Law, and today we're going to be flipping the script. We're going to be looking at what AEW is not doing right and why they are not crushing it in pro wrestling. But hold on, though. AEW has had a lot of successes in pro wrestling, and there are a few areas that they are missing the mark. And today we're going to talk about the mark that they are missing. But wait, before you fix your face up, before you decide, I'm not going to watch this because he's an AEW hater. No, I am not an AEW hater. What I am is I am a semi-retired pro wrestler. I'm a pro wrestling fan. And even though I may not be a diehard fan of AEW, I still am a fan of pro wrestling. In all fairness, I did put AEW over a couple weeks ago. You can find that episode here on the Tristan Law Show. It's called What AEW is Doing Right and Why They Are Crushing It in Pro Wrestling. But right now, we're not talking about that. We are just talking about why they are not crushing it and why they are not doing right. I want to hear your comments, though. Jump into the comments with your comment. I want to hear from you. I'll be reading your comments throughout the show, and even if after the show is live, if you still want to comment, I will be reading your comment then. That's just the kind of person that I am. I just want to interact with you. I want to give you a place that you can interact. One of the biggest places that AEW, I think that they're failing is storytelling. They have flashes of brilliance. AEW does some really cool things when it comes to, storytelling, but there are several storylines that just seem to lose momentum or they just get dropped entirely. For example, a perfect example of a inconsistent storyline is they push stars. They push younger stars like Wardlow. They push Wardlow, and he gets built up as like, oh my God, he's this big monster, and he disappears for weeks, losing all the momentum when he had. When Wardlow came in, Wardlow was the lackey. He was the brolic butler. That's something they could have used, the brolic butler. He was the brolic butler for MJF. And eventually, towards the storyline, you started seeing Wardlow standing up for himself. He did this whole thing with MJF, and that just went to the wayside. And then Wardlow came back and said, "My name is Wardlow, and I'm going to take what I want." And then they got rid of him again. See, here's my issue with that. The thing about pro wrestling that makes pro wrestling special, that makes some of the classic movies, the iconic movies, special. What makes your iconic matches special is the emotional investment that you have as a viewer, as a person that's consuming the product. That's what makes it special for you. And fans want to emotionally invest in characters and stories. The frequent stop and start and the loose ends makes it so hard just to stay connected. If AEW can tighten up these screws, they can fix up their narratives and offer more follow-throughs on their storylines, I think that AEW can elevate their product even further. Let me just say this. I'm not one of those non-AEW diehards. I'm not one of those big AEW fans that want AEW to go away. I don't want AEW to go away. AEW is very important to the pro wrestling business. AEW has given a lot of people that I personally know an opportunity in the realm of pro wrestling that WWE wasn't offering them. So I don't want AEW to go away. I think that with AEW being around, I think WWE is at its best. WWE has to be at its best. So anybody out there that's a hater that thinks that AEW should go away or AEW, should just, go out of business, and you're a WWE fan, you're an idiot for that. You're an idiot. But I do want to thank you for watching. If you're enjoying the content so far and you want to stay updated on all things pro wrestling, make sure to hit the subscribe button below. Turn on those notifications because you don't want to miss an episode. Whether I'm breaking down the latest AEW storylines or looking at WWE pay-per-views, or you come here for your exclusive interviews, I've got you covered. Join the community and let's keep the conversation going. Another reason why AEW is not crushing it in pro wrestling and what they're doing wrong is the overcrowded roster. They've got too many wrestlers and too little TV time. AEW's roster size is currently about 175 wrestlers. And that's including male and female. That's not including the people from Ring of Honor, because some of the people are on both rosters, so I didn't think it would be fair to count that. But AEW has about 175 to 180 wrestlers. And their programming time, AEW has 5 hours of live television each week, just like WWE. Just like WWE. They have Dynamite, which is 2 hours, Collision, which is 2 hours also, and Rampage, which is 1 hour. Now, with a focus on main event stars and key storylines, AEW's focus on marquee matches and long-term booking, it helps some talent thrive. But many wrestlers just get lost in the shuffle. You see, Dynamite is the flagship show. That is their Monday Night Raw. That is their Monday Night Football. That is their go-to show. When you're talking about AEW, the first thing that comes to mind is Dynamite. They do a really good job on Dynamite, letting you see who the big stars are. But Collision and Rampage, to me, just don't feel like another big show. Like SmackDown, even though we have been conditioned to see that SmackDown is always the number 2 show, it was the recorded show when Raw was live. We've come to learn that SmackDown is still a player. We still sit down and watch SmackDown every week. I'll be honest, I watch Dynamite very sporadically, but I don't watch Collision or Rampage that much at all. Honestly, maybe there's a little bit too much pro wrestling going on out there, but my thing too is though that when I feel that if I watch Collision or Rampage, that I'm not getting the same exact quality that I'd be getting if I'd be watching Dynamite. With such a large roster that AEW has, many mid-card and up-and-coming talent, they lack regular TV time. It causes potential stars like when Andrade was there, or even Miro, who's still there. I think Miro's still there. They fade into the background. The overcrowded roster often leads to storyline just feeling like stagnant, inconsistencies, and hurting the momentum in talent. The key point there is that AEW's massive roster is stretched too thin across 3 shows with limited story time to develop emerging talent and leading to underused wrestlers and stagnant storylines. The thing with AEW is that when they first started, they didn't know who they were. And what they were trying to do was they were trying to find their identity. They signed every Tom, Dick, and Harry. They signed people that didn't belong in the pro wrestling ring. They signed people that still needed more reps, which is okay. They're a growing company, and the people that they signed could grow with them too. They were the first company nationally to be a mainstream pro wrestling company that did different things, that have LGBTQ plus wrestlers. They didn't wait 100 years to get their first, black world champion. This is different things that AEW did differently that makes them stand out. But because of that, they had so many wrestlers. They just had so much weight. At one time in 2019, 2020, before the pandemic, it felt like such a competition between WWE and AEW in who could sign who first. And because of that, AEW had a huge roster, and WWE had a roster of people they didn't know what to do with. I think part of the issue when it comes to having that crowded roster with AEW, for example, you can look at somebody like Andrade, or like Miro, or like even Sasha Banks, now known as Mercedes Moné. You're looking at her and you're like, man, she was doing so great in WWE, and look at her now. I'm not really too emotionally invested in Mercedes Moné. I'm not saying that Mercedes Moné is a worse wrestler than she was when she was in WWE. If you ask me, I think she's even better. However, it's not the player that I'm not a fan of. I'm just not a fan of the team. One of the issues that AEW is having to why they are not crushing it in the pro wrestling business and what they're not doing right is the long-term planning. Everything just feels like, they're just trying it out. They're just throwing stuff against the wall and just to see what sticks in, and then they'll go with it. For example, they had that 4 pillars match, right? They had the 4 pillars of AEW. Let me see if I can remember this. It's MJF, Darby Allin, Jack Perry, and oh God, who's the fourth person? Maybe Sammy Guevara. The four people that AEW built on those backs of those wrestlers. They are the future of pro wrestling. It was a great storyline. They could have put a championship on there, have them keep going, but like it just didn't go long enough. It just happened too quickly. It feels like they're booking from pay-per-view to pay-per-view, where right now WWE, they're booking from like year to year. They're booking from January to January. Okay, they're booking from January of this year to January of next year. Keep up if you can. AEW has been long criticized. While they do execute some great short-term feuds, many storylines just don't have a clear destination. You're watching Dynamite and you're like, where's this going? For example, the direction of the Elite storyline with Hangman and Page, it started out really strong, but then it seemed to lack clear direction because it just dragged on. AEW has developed exciting storylines, but failed to follow through on them, leaving fans disappointed. The storyline between Andrade El Idolo and the Death Triangle, there was an initial setup for a feud, but it fizzled out without satisfying any conclusion, making it feel incomplete. Here's the point. We as pro wrestling fans, we want resolution. When stories are dropped without explanation, it affects the investment of the audience. AEW needs to do a better job tying up those loose ends. It's like watching your favorite television show and they introduce a new interesting character, and then 2 episodes later, you're just looking and going, well, what happened to that character? Okay? Without long-term planning, AEW risks losing the attention of fans who want to see long-term payoffs. That's what we want. We want to be here for a while. We want to be entertained, okay? The thing with AEW that I will always say, though, is that AEW, they just do pro wrestling. They don't do sports entertainment. And when they try to do sports entertainment, they don't do so well. Pro wrestling, if you want a solid pro wrestling match, AEW is what you're supposed to watch. And we're going to go into that a little bit more. But I just want to remind you, don't miss Friday. I'm going live with an exclusive interview featuring Timid Tamir Gibbs. Set a reminder and join us on YouTube. This is going to be this Friday at noon live on YouTube Eastern. It's going to be a pretty cool chat with Tamir Gibbs. He's an up-and-coming wrestler. He has plenty of mentors, and I think the guy has a bright future. I always have him on my list that when I come back to pro wrestling, I'm looking for you, Tamir. Another reason why what AEW is doing wrong and why they are not crushing it in the pro wrestling business, the women's division. Throwing my hands up is the women's division. They tried. They tried in the beginning, and they worked so darn hard to put the women first, to position the women. They had a female referee in this day and age before the WWE. Okay, so it showed that they were doing right things, moving in the right direction as it comes to the women's division. They've struggled with the women's division, they being AEW. While they have talented wrestlers, the division often feels like an afterthought. Right now, they got Mercedes Moné. They even got Nyla Rose. Throw it up for Nyla Rose, right? Nyla Rose is in there as well, too. But the thing, too, that when I was watching things with, Hikari Huda, whatever the woman's name is, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. She was one of the first AEW champions. I don't feel that she should have been the first AEW champion. They should have done the same exact thing that they did with the men's championship and put it on somebody that's notable. That's what they did with Chris Jericho. You put it on somebody that's notable, and you get that recognition for your company. Somebody who was watching AEW accidentally, they would turn on the TV and go, oh, 20 years ago, I remember that Chris Jericho guy in WWE. Oh, look, he's still wrestling now. Let me sit back and see what he's got now. I think if AEW had done that with the women's championship, they would have been all right. I do feel, though, at a time, the female wrestlers in AEW, WWE female wrestlers were heads, and the female wrestlers in AEW were like well below. And I mean that respectfully. And I say that because unlike the WWE, they're getting like thousands of reps, right? At WWE, they were wrestling on Monday Night Raw. They're wrestling a couple house shows. They're going international, doing all this. At the time, AEW was just one show. So people weren't getting reps. I always said if I was a wrestler in AEW at the time and knowing that I'm an indie guy and I don't have that many reps underneath my belt, one of the things that I was going to do was when I was not wrestling for AEW, I was going to A, wrestle on the indies, and B, I was going to live in a wrestling school because I wanted to be the best that I can be. I would show up to AEW events early and ask somebody like Dustin Rhodes, hey, can you get in the ring and show me some stuff? Can you help me get better? That's the reason why I think that WWE's roster, female roster, was heads and shoulders above what AEW was doing at the time, and why the women's roster struggled with AEW. Are they coming up these days? Yes, they're coming up. You got wrestlers like Thunder Rosa, Britt Baker, Hikaru Shida, that's the woman's name. They're fantastic, but the division as a whole right now, I don't think it's getting enough spotlight, nor are there compelling storylines. Yes, if you know me personally, you know that I was really excited that Mercedes Moné is getting divorced because you know what? Maybe she could finally be my boo. I love Mercedes Moné. I think she's a really great wrestler. But like I said before, it's not that I hate her. It's not that I'm not a fan of her. I'm just not a real big fan of the team that she plays for. Will I watch? Yes, very sporadically. Compared to the WWE's women division, though, AEW does have a lot of work to do to give their female wrestlers the talent that they deserve. And that's going to definitely start with the female wrestlers getting a lot more reps. And in order to be a better pro wrestler, you need to be in there with somebody that's better than you. I once wrestled Jake the Snake Roberts' brother, and he was way better than me, way more experienced than me. And when I came out of that ring with him, I was definitely a different person. Now, I was talking about WWE and AEW, the comparison, that WWE does sports entertainment really well. And pro wrestling secondary. But if you're a pro wrestling fan and you want to see diehard pro wrestling matches, right, you go to AEW. But when AEW does gimmick matches, they don't really do them well. Okay, like for example, that exploding match that they did a couple years ago that we all don't talk about, that AEW wants us to forget. But I think that with AEW, they have an over-reliance on gimmick matches. They rely too heavily on gimmick matches, whether it's no DQ, blood feud, ladder matches, cage matches, everything. For example, AEW's been in business for, 4 going on 5 years. And they're overusing the blood and guts and the lights out matches. They can make these events feel less impactful, and that was the issue with WWE. For example, WWE was doing Hell in a Cell every single year. They had a pay-per-view that just called Hell in a Cell. And I feel that because of that, you kind of paint yourself into a corner to where you have to do a Hell in a Cell match. But now AEW has a blood and guts event to where they have a war game style match, and it just feels like, okay, we've seen this already. They should save that match for when it's really special. For when you got two teams out there who just don't like each other, and you know what, you just want to put them in the cage and just have them maim each other, that's where your bloods and guts match come out, okay? You can't just have the match just to have the match. While these matches are exciting, don't let me say that they're not exciting. While these matches are exciting, they can lead to fatigue, they can lead to burnout, making them feel less special over time. Do you think AEW uses too many gimmick matches? Let me know in the chat. We're going to take a look at some of the comments that I positioned on Threads. On Threads, I asked a question. Wrestling Threads, tell me what AEW is not doing right and why they are not crushing it in pro wrestling. I did say on Threads that I did put them over a few weeks ago, but now I'm looking for the opposite opinion. So let's take a look at that. The first one that we got here, hold on, we got a little technical difficulty. The first one that we have here is going to be from, let's see who we're going to choose first. Mike Crime says, I'd really like to see them separate AEW from Ring of Honor, so it's like WWE NXT. He feels that they could clean up some of the storytelling too. For example, a good recent example is stripping the Bang Bang Gang of the trios titles because Jay was injured. Meanwhile, MJF kept defending the ROH titles when Cole was injured. Okay, I can see that you definitely have a really good point there. I feel that AEW should separate Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor should be like their version of NXT, to where they have their up-and-coming stars that are not really ready for the main roster, that are ready for for main TV for Collision, Dynamite, and Rampage. I agree. I think that's a really good call out there. Let's see what else we got here. We got Open Road Mike. Open Road Mike says, too much new toy syndrome, lots of big signings, but after a couple weeks, they are forgotten. Really good point. Really good point. I can't really, dispute that at all. The thing that I think that AEW has the issue with is that they sign over all of our famous popular pro wrestlers, right? Like, for example, they had AEW, they had Cody Rhodes there. And Cody Rhodes, I think Cody did the best thing about not booking himself to be the champion because it's so easy to do it. But I feel like when you look at other people like Andrade, they didn't know what to do with him, right? When I have my toy, with all the toys and the equipment that's sitting in front of me right now, this is the level of the Tristan Law show that I can give you. But when it's sitting in front of you, you can be doing something totally different with it. And it may not be as good as mine, or mine may not be as good as yours because the toys are different. And what I do with the toys is what I do with the toys. Let's take a look at another message from Hambone. Hambone says, not having distinct rosters between AEW and ROH. That's another one. Yeah, keep dead weight on the bloated roster, getting stars white hot and cooling them off. Examples be OC, Wardlow, Kingston, The Acclaimed, Willow, and as a follow-up, not pulling the trigger when someone is hot. Booking huge arenas, knowing they only want to fill 3 to 10K, depending on the show, still having the silly production mistakes 5 years later. Tony Khan, not allowing someone with more knowledge to handle the heavy load in booking. Okay, so let me say this. Pro wrestling promoters are... Tony Khan, he's a promoter. He's a promoter. He's got money. He promotes pro wrestling. And the pro wrestling promoter in him wants to fill the huge arena with asses to elbows, but they know that they can't really fill it, but they hope that they can fill it. They're not like WWE, to where in the WWE, you're not really selling out the show with the matches. You're selling out the show with the name of the event. You buy tickets to WrestleMania before you even know what the main event is. You buy tickets people already bought tickets for Bad Blood, which is next month on Peacock here in the United States, or WWE Network everywhere else. You've already bought tickets to Bad Blood, not even knowing what's happening. You're not even showing if it's going to be good blood, but you're watching it saying, you know what, I hope it's going to be Bad Blood. So like, AEW's not there yet. AEW needs to get on the level of the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is one of those events to where you're buying tickets and you don't even know if your favorite team is going to play. Thanks for the comment. Got another comment from Ian Perez. He says, they don't seem to properly elevate young talent. They had a good runway to do everything right and be a true, unique alternative, but in the end, it became WWE light. Especially compared to TNA that has done an amazing job creating a distinct brand. At this point, AEW is just another place to work, which is perfectly fine. I agree. I think that AEW being another place to work is perfectly fine. I think that even though you may see AEW as being WWE light, that remember at one time TNA was WWE light. TNA was just trying to find out who they were. And I think that AEW is just trying to find out who they are. They don't know who they are. They have a much better idea of who they are in 2024 than they did in 2020. Definitely 2020. Definitely when they had that press conference saying who they were, they didn't know who they were. And I think if you give AEW a solid 5 more years, it's going to be able to be a stark difference. But like I said, when you're watching AEW, you're watching AEW for the wrestling match. You're not watching for all the gaga and all the hoopla. You're just watching for the wrestling match. And if you like a straight up pro wrestling match, you're watching AEW, you're in the right place. Look at another message from Threads. It's from Dr. Hubris, Dr._Hubris. Not sure if you're really a doctor. For me, it's the consistent escalation of dangerous spots and the normalization of big moves being meaningless. Where do you go from pile drivers off the second rope and suffocating a man with a plastic bag and a vertebrae on a cinder block being a 2 count? I've given AEW a lot of chances because they have performers I like, and I think an alternative to WWE can only be a good thing. But they lost me last night, and it was uncomfortable in the wrong ways. He's talking about the last event that AEW had. And look, honestly, as a pro wrestler, I don't understand how you can get hit with a Canadian Destroyer and next second you're up, you're doing a super kick. In the realm of storytelling in a pro wrestling style that I learned, in the WWE pro wrestling storytelling, in the moving the matches nice and slow, that doesn't work, right? Think about it. You just got dropped on your head. How did you just get dropped on your head and now you're like, okay, I'm going to do a super kick? It doesn't make sense. Or you're in a match doing 10 super kicks. Shawn Michaels, right, the one that made the super kick so famous in this day and age, right? He's beaten bigger guys with the super kick. He's beaten The Undertaker. He's beaten Kane. He's beaten Triple H. He's beaten Bret Hart. He's beaten Stone Cold Steve Austin. And if you put any of those guys on the same exact level as any of the AEW guys, I don't think that they shine a candle to them. One of the things that I learned when I went to pro wrestling school is because you can do the move doesn't mean that you need to do the move. So because you could do a Canadian Destroyer doesn't mean that you need to do a Canadian Destroyer. But you know what? That's what AEW fans like, right? That's what brings a lot of AEW fans to the yard, right? That's their milkshake. But for me as a WWE fan, I'm looking for an alternative to WWE that's pretty close to what I'm watching in WWE. And for me, I think that's AEW. Look at another comment from Threads. This one is from my guy, Head of the Table, 2324. He says, years 1 to 3, every division had a rich story and long-term booking, and sub-stories for non-main event talent. A quarter of the roster they have now, and one show during the week, they are owning the viewership. They stared away from that model. Okay, Head of the Table, thank you for your comment. I agree 100%. That's what AEW was doing at the time. They were trying to be different. They were trying to be different from WWE because not everybody had a story in WWE. When you watch Raw, not everybody had a story. Some people were just in throwaway matches. And I think that WWE has done a really good job not having throwaway matches. That when you watch their pay-per-view, their PLE, premium live events, every single match has some kind of purpose. Okay? And AEW was just trying to be different. I think that with them trying to be different, they lost themselves. And like I said before, if AEW give AEW another 5 to 10 years, there's going to be different minds in AEW. The minds in AEW now that are still there in another 5 years, which will make it 10, would have leveled up and maybe they'll see things differently. A lot of those minds in AEW never had the opportunity of sitting in the learning tree of the WWE. I'm not saying that I want AEW to do sports entertainment because that's not what they do. But what I want them to do is what they do well and entertain everybody while you're doing it, because at the end of the day, pro wrestling is entertainment, okay? Let's look at another comment. We got one from Saucy Brew Crew. He says, they use the ref angle way too much in matches. Blading is unnecessary, and the lack of story continuation. So we seem to have a common thread here when we're looking at all the matches here in AEW, is that people just want a little bit of consistency when it comes to the stories. Looking at the final comment, Charles.D. Lincoln, he says, Chris Jericho has become unwatchable and takes up way too much TV time. With the exception of Will Ospreay and MJF, however, Tony books people to become less over the longer someone is in the company. Someone will enter and be in a huge deal, then 6 months later, they're just another in a 12-man tag match with 3 random masked guys from another company. Trios title kill the tag division. Tony often gets bored and somehow gets over and completely kills their momentum. For example, Wardlow and etc. Okay. Trios tag team wrestling is not something that I like, but if you're watching New Japan Pro Wrestling, if you're watching AAA, you're watching Lucha Libre, I guess that's somebody's cup of tea. But for my cup of tea, I'm finally coming to the realization that it makes sense for AEW to have all the titles that they have. And the reason why I think they should have all the titles that they have almost 200 wrestlers. They have 200 wrestlers almost on their roster. Go look at it. It's about 175 to 180. And those are the people that you know about, okay? Does Tony get bored? I don't think that Tony gets bored. I think that Tony probably listens to the people online and instead of trying the storyline and following it through, maybe that's why it falls flat, right? Somebody like Will Ospreay and MJF, however, yeah, I love seeing them on TV. I don't like Will Ospreay. I'm not familiar with Will Ospreay, but I like MJF. And I like MJF whether he's a heel or a babyface, right? Chris Jericho being unwatchable and takes up too much TV time, I kind of give you a half an agree point there. And the reason why I give you a half an agree point is that Chris Jericho understands sports entertainment and he understands pro wrestling. And with him understanding sports entertainment and pro wrestling, I think that, and having wrestled for WCW and ECW back in the day, I think that Chris Jericho has a good balance. And I think that he is something that needs to be on TV because they're still trying to attract those fans that left pro wrestling after WCW went out of business. We got a message in the chat, and this one's from David Hadley. He says, the blading. They're so peeing. Okay, well, they're peeing. Yeah, well, I think the blading, that's when they cut themselves and they juice and they get colored, the easy way. I think that's, for me, I'm not a big fan of blood. When I was wrestling, people would always ask me all the time, oh, are you going to bleed? I'm like, no, I don't bleed. The reason why I've never bled in a pro wrestling match is because I never needed to. Because WWE was out there doing their thing and they didn't need to blade, so I didn't need to blade, and they were making a hell of money with that. Thanks so much for your comments on Threads. You can always follow me on Threads at The Real Big Tris. We have covered a lot today of AEW's inconsistent storytelling, overcrowded roster, lack of long-term planning, underdeveloped women's division, and overuse of gimmick matches. What is AEW doing wrong, and why are they not crushing it in pro wrestling? I told you. What do you think? Tell me in the comments. While AEW has accomplished a lot, there are definitely areas to where they need to improve if they truly want to dominate the wrestling landscape. They came in from zero to be number 2 really quickly. And can they be number 1? I don't know, man. WWE has a tried and true product that works for them. So if you want to beat them, you're going to have a lot of work to do. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this. Let me know in the comments what you think AEW needs to work on. But before we go, don't forget that this Friday at noon, we're going to have an awesome interview with Timid Tamir Gibbs. He's an up-and-coming pro wrestler, and you don't want to miss the conversation that I have with him. Thanks so much for watching the Tristan Law Show. My name is Tristan Law. I appreciate the time that you have, and I'll see you Friday. Thanks for watching. See you next time.